Hey guys, welcome to the All Things Running podcast. I'm here today talking with Matt Fox, founder of Sweat Elite. It's actually my third time having him on the podcast, so hopefully you're not sick of hearing him because I find the chats with him to always be insightful and enjoyable. So I wanted to talk to him after running two sub 220 marathons back to back within a month of each other because I thought that was something worth talking about. So um, we brought him back on. We talked about that. We also kind of zoomed out and talked about things from a broader lens. We touched on towards the end also a bunch of different topics like double thresholds, continuous lactate monitoring, a lot of buzzwords in the running world right now. So I think you guys will find it interesting, as did I, and I hope you enjoy. Yeah, we can get right into things, man. Yeah, thanks
Yeah,
for coming on to the podcast, Matt. It's as always, it's pretty nice and simple to get you on. You're very open to chatting with anyone and everyone, so appreciate that, and also just your openness lately with your podcast. Like that's I find that refreshing personally. Like you just being so open. Yeah, like it's like so easy to follow you and your journey. You're very like, and that's one thing that makes my life easier, but also harder because like got to find the questions through things that you haven't talked about because you do talk about so much. Um,
yeah.
but I think like for a lot of people, maybe they don't listen to you as much as I do, so it'll still be good for them to hear some of the things you've talked about. So hopefully you won't have to repeat yourself too much, but I'll try my best.
It's funny because I follow a lot of probably mostly people that are not in the running space on podcasts, right? Like people to do with health and people to do with travel and stuff. And I've noticed that if I try and consume all of their content, they do repeat themselves a lot. But
Yeah,
like you said, it's that your audience probably hasn't heard a lot of me before, or at least maybe a lot of them
yeah.
probably haven't. So it's not a problem to sort of touch back on topics. And when you go back on topics, sometimes new things come to mind. So I'm happy to chat about anything to do with running. But thanks for the invite, man. This is the third time, right? I'm stoked.
Yeah, yeah, third time. Everyone's like, man, I've had enough of Matt. Like, it's like, I don't know, man. You just create things to talk about. So, yeah. So for those who are listening who don't know Matt, I'm talking with Matt Fox, who is the founder of Sweat Elite. You can find them on YouTube or on their website. Um, I initially kind of found Matt through Sweat Elite, watching the all those good YouTube videos that were coming out during the quarantine of COVID. Um, and so I'm sure that's how a lot of people found you, but now you've kind of expanded out into the triathlon scene as well and are doing some cool stuff in that space. So certainly cool to see that as someone who's been kind of getting into triathlon lately too, just watching like Lionel Sanders and recently I started watching Lucy Charles Barclay.
Oh
She
yeah,
has a good channel. So certainly cool to see you getting into that space. But congrats on getting married, by the way, and of course running two sub 220 marathons back to back within a month of each other. Um, some big things in your life lately.
it's been a big last, what is it, 5, 6 weeks? Yeah. So got married first week of October, and then Chicago Marathon finally took down the personal best, which had been sitting there for just under 3 years. And then ironically, yeah, on the weekend, 3 days ago, I went back to Indianapolis Marathon where I had my personal best before Chicago from 3 years back and managed to run another personal best. So it's been a good last month and a half. I guess most of the reasoning for that or the outcome of that has been the work I did over the summer. Obviously, at least when we speak to the performances in the on the roads. But yeah, man, happy to talk about all those minor details and.
Yeah.
It's awesome I'll tell you what, though, I really am enjoying just living in one place here in the US, in Chicago. That's something that I lacked for a long time, which is a bit of a sort of weird reason as to why. The main, I guess, reason was because I didn't have the ability to permanently live anywhere other than Australia, which is so far away and so disconnected from most of the running, scene that it was a bit tricky to actually have a home and have a base. So now I'm in the process of getting a visa, and that's kind of made all the other things a lot easier. Speaking more to the training and the racing. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's good.
Yeah, and that's interesting, because I think one of the questions I was going to ask, I'm just going to be jumping around like crazy, but one of the things I
I
was going to
like it.
ask you was kind of, I know you mentioned before, I think I listened to your podcast that came out recently, your kind of, what was it, in my opinion, episode. You were talking about how not a lot has changed for you to get to this point where you finally dip under the 220 mark, but I thought about it more and I was like, well, I mean, some things have changed, like in terms of having kind of more of a stable life, living in Chicago, kind of staying there and really focusing on the training. Um, so, I mean, certainly some things have changed for you. And so maybe despite the fact that the training necessarily hasn't changed much, you still have that stability now. Also, you're at sea level. So I'd imagine maybe some things change there because you can kind of get more intensity and you can run faster with less rest. So, like, could you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So if I ever did specifically say that not much has changed, I probably wasn't summarizing very well because I would say that you're correct. A fair few things have actually changed. And I think probably the biggest thing has been, when you're traveling around the world, it's something that people don't fully understand until you do it. And it's a lot of fun traveling around the world, but it does come with some pretty significant challenges if you're trying to pursue a goal. Because I feel like humans are very habit based, we're very routine based, and environment plays a really big role in creating habits and routines. And I think, especially when you talk about or you speak to the food that you eat and the things you consume, when it comes to drinking and eating. And I think I dismissed the idea that that would play a large role, which is crazy because I really shouldn't have dismissed that. I should have been more um, knowledgeable in this space, I guess. But I kind of always thought the diet and the weight at which I'm racing at, the body weight at which I'm racing at, aren't that much of a big deal. That's where my head was at for many years, up until probably earlier this year. And I kind of rethought that whole process due to a range of things that I'd sort of noticed in my own training and racing over the last 3 years. And then I started to put a lot more emphasis on things like diet and just regular routine. And I remember really sort of trying to almost macro analyze where is my energy going on a day to day basis. And before it was often going to how do I get from Frankfurt to Berlin, and then like how do I get from here to there without
Yeah.
missing a flight? And so much of that mind energy is now being diverted to things that are actually helping me move forward with running. So that might be recovery. That might be the diet thing is huge for me. Up until
Mhm,
February this year, I was mindless with how I ate and drank, and I would say across the
mhm.
board, my diet would have been B plus up until earlier this year. I probably wouldn't have given it an A, but over
Yeah.
the last sort of 8 months, I've tried to turn that into basically an A plus diet. Now I probably haven't quite gotten to A
Mhm.
plus, but maybe to A, and that's made a
Yeah.
big difference in the weight at which I race at, the way at which I feel in training, and
Mhm,
yeah, we can dive into any of that if you like. But I
mhm,
think all of those things play a big role. And also just doing little things like going to the gym twice a week. I never really did that
mhm,
before. And
mhm,
sometimes people in the past would be like, why don't you just get to the gym when you're on the road traveling? And while it's always possible to do that, it's just a lot harder because you don't have a gym membership, which might mean that you have to buy day passes, which are much more expensive. Now, I'm not a multimillionaire, so I still do have to look at my finances and strongly consider a $50 day pass to a gym twice a week. That's not something that I can really afford over
mhm,
the long term. So all these little things sort of added up to make it a bit more difficult to do the one percenters as I was traveling. And like you said,
yeah,
since February, I've been living in this apartment building where I'm speaking to you from now. And it's just a lot easier to do all the minor details. And it really does make me realize how much all those small one percenters, if you want to call them that buzzword,
mhm,
they really do add up and help because now my mind is in a space where I think a few more minutes is possible faster in the marathon. I don't know exactly how many minutes, but you'll never know until you get there.
yeah,
And it's crazy because 2 years ago, there was phases where I was like running 2:22, being like, I don't know how I can possibly even get faster than that. And
mhm,
so, yeah,
mhm.
it's all those small things add up, and you're more than welcome to dive into any of those little one percenters, and I can speak as much as I can to it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I like what you said about kind of the mental energy that goes into what you were doing
Mm.
before, which is a lot of that travel and stuff, because I think people underlook that, and it's you kind of have to think of stress very holistically, like it's a bucket, and the stress all goes into the same place. So it's not like running stress is different from life stress, like it's all going to the same place, and so that's going to affect your training and how you're able to like perform day to day, in pursuing a goal such as like sub 220 marathon. So I like that you said that because I think people tend to underlook that. Like life stress plays a big part in your ability to perform. And so you having the stability of living in Chicago, like I'm sure that made quite a difference because I can imagine it's pretty stressful going around the country all the time. Like your body's constantly adjusting to the time zone changes, and um, like something that I haven't really experienced. I mean, I only went to Europe once, and that was pretty tough for a few days. So I can't imagine doing that like all the time. Um, but and you're always having to find like a new gym, or like if you want to try to lift, like there's just so many things you have to try to do to maintain good practices if you're traveling.
Yeah, and this doesn't come from any sort of scientific research or anything, but I feel like just because I've done this so much, I did once hear someone speak on a podcast about this, and it's like when you're in your environment and you get used to the environment and you know where everything is, you can sort of act on autopilot, and you don't have to expend a lot of mental energy to walk. Like I've got a Whole Foods 200 meters away, an Aldi 600 meters away. I shop at both. And the reason for
Mhm.
saying that is because I don't have to think about how to get there and where to get the foods I need, right? But when you're
Yeah,
in a place where you don't know where you are, it's almost like your brain has to work 2 to 3 times harder all the time to figure
for
out,
sure.
how do I find this place? How do I source pasta? How do I get to this place? And I think when you look at it in a moment to moment situation, who cares? But when you add all that all up throughout the day, you end up much more tired at the end of the day in a place where you don't know where you are because you're never on autopilot and you're constantly trying to problem solve. And then that trip, I think that. So what I'm saying right now is just like my gut feeling as to as to where my energy is going, not
Yeah,
based on any sort
yeah,
of paper or anything. But
yeah.
yeah, when the whole day is filled with decisions that I have to problem solve almost every minute. Like, how do I get here? How do I get there? How do I direct myself to this place? That then means that I think I'm slightly affected in training and in racing
Mhm.
because I don't have as much to give mentally in the workout,
Yeah,
right? But now that I'm just
yeah,
based here and everything's familiar, I know where everything is. I know my running routes. I don't even have to plan them anymore. It's almost like that gives me an extra amount of energy to put into the training, and I think that's probably a pretty big deal. Yeah. So
yeah.
yeah, and you can only really fully learn this when you do it, I think.
Mhm,
Someone that's
mhm.
never done it, they wouldn't fully understand it until they do it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, definitely. That's very interesting. Um, I was getting a little in my head of myself, so I'll step back a little bit and kind of, for people who don't know what Matt did, he did, like I said before, he did run two sub 220 marathons, but even before that, you had run 4:17 in the mile during kind of a speed development block, which you've talked about before. You spent roughly 12 weeks or so working on your speed, kind of doing like 5K to mile work, coming away with the 4:17 end of May, um, which it sounds like you kind of wanted a little more, but suffice to say, I think there's a lot that probably helped you for the marathon in terms of that speed development block. And then, you kind of came away in Chicago with your first sub 220 after a few years of kind of going at it, dealing with the cramping and all that. And you came away with a 2:19:31 for the Americans. That's a 5:17 per mile average. Perhaps I should have done the kilometer conversion there.
318.
318. Okay, so
Yeah.
318 per kilometer. It's coming with 36 overall. Um, and then, backing that up, Indianapolis Marathon not too long ago on the 9th of November, he came away with 2:18:41. Um, so knocked off 50 seconds. And looking at your splits, you went through halfway in a whole minute and 20 seconds faster. So you are on track for 2:16:41 actually at the 30K mark, which is interesting looking at that data. But obviously the cramping came on strong for that one. And so you kind of weren't able to reap the rewards of that first 30K in that race. But suffice to say, I mean, I find that fascinating, your ability to actually drop 50 seconds um, in a marathon that was done a month after another marathon. So that's something that I really want to talk about in this chat is kind of your ability to bounce back and run a good second marathon there. So that's just some context for people. And so I would like to spend the next maybe 20 or 30 minutes or what have you kind of dissecting those blocks. We don't have to get into the nitty gritty, but I'd love to just take a moment to kind of start by talking about your mile block in particular, where you were kind of focusing on that speed development. First and foremost, did you notice like the speed comment? Were you surprised at how the speed came back? Because like I feel like 4:17 is pretty good. I mean, I know you're passed as a 800-meter professional runner, so like you obviously have that speed deep down somewhere. At least I like the thought. So, did you notice
Yeah,
that?
Yeah, you're killing it on this point. You summarized that just brilliantly. I guess the only thing that I don't want to say the word correct, but you said 12-week speed block, 3 months. It was actually probably a little bit longer than that. It was pretty closer to five
Okay.
months. But that would have been
Okay.
hard to tell online because I was sort of I started in February. I didn't really post about it for about a month and a
Okay.
half there. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
yeah. So you're exactly right with that entire last sort of 8 month summary. Uh, the speed took a little bit longer than I thought to really notice in training. I think in the first, so I would say I kicked off the speed block in the middle of February, and
Mm,
I basically held that through until the end of July. So that would be 5.5 months, I think. And yeah, I think when I first started doing this speed stuff, which was basically 3 workouts a week, one almost max effort sprints workout, which I've done every single week, even all the way through until last week, Indianapolis
mm,
Marathon. So that's typically 10 by 100 meters or 10 by 150 meters or something similar. Usually that's on a hill. So it's a slight elevation, slight climb, sorry. And the other two workouts would be something at about mile 3K pace. So typically 400s or 600s or 800 repeats, pretty fast, much, much faster than marathon pace. And then the long run would be either an easy sort of 90 to 2 hour, 90 minutes to 2 hours, and then every other week usually would be a long run of a similar duration, but a
mm,
faster finish. So it'd be like a steady state, almost marathon effort pace at the end. And
mm.
the 417 was a solid run. That was, as you said, at the end of May, I think, or sometime around there, maybe early June.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I was aiming for around 412, 413, I think. I don't want to make excuses here, but I think the one thing that I strangely struggled with that day, which is bizarre to really sort of say back, but the race was at about 9:30 p.m. and
Mm,
I don't
mm.
know. I go to bed pretty early and wake up pretty early, and I really
Yeah.
probably should have prepared for that and spent a week staying up till 12. Because I'll tell you what, when I was warming up at 8:40, I was like, man, I'm like ready to go to bed. Like this is not ideal. But 417 is still a solid run for me. I ran
Yeah.
346 for the 1500 back when I was what was it, 25? I'm 37 now. So, a 417 is basically splitting about a 401. So I'm way
Mm,
off where I was. I'm a good 100, 120 meters behind where I was 12 years ago. But I think my gut feeling is, and I could be wrong with this, but I think if I ran another mile in a week or two later, I think 412, 413, if I had one maybe in the morning or in the afternoon, would have been
yeah.
possible. So that's probably where I feel like I probably got to in the mile training. I don't think that 417 was a true reflection of where I got to, but it was close.
Mm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think I was pretty content with that because in previous years, I think if I try and run a mile, I've really lost a lot of that speed over the last 4 or 5 years. Obviously,
Mm,
hammering the marathon pace stuff and that steady state 5:30 to 6 minute mile or 3:30 to 3:45 per kilometer zone. I've just hammered that for 5 years, and I've gotten much
yeah.
stronger at that. But that
Mm-hmm.
comes with a cost. It comes with losing VO2 max. It comes with losing aerobic power, and I got slow. Like I came
Mm,
from a background
mm,
where I could run a 48-second 400, and I've said to people before that maybe a year and a half ago when I was training to try and run sub 220, I reckon I'd be flat out breaking 55. Whereas I think I probably got to a
mm.
point in May, June where I might have been able to run like a 52, possibly.
Yeah.
And that's really where I want to try and hammer that zone in the
Mm,
next few years more and try and keep that 52. I shouldn't say 50 because I didn't run a 52, but I feel like if I probably did run it for 400, that'd be what I would have
mm,
gone for. And I
mm.
think it's really important for me to keep that there and not
Yeah.
lose that
Yeah.
anymore. And even try and maybe get down to 51 if possible.
Mm,
And it's weird because if you'd asked me 2, 3 years ago when I was really learning so much about the marathon, does 400 speed really matter in the marathon? I would have said probably not. But I've
yeah.
really started to change my mind a bit about that. I think it does a bit
Mm,
for a lot of
mm.
people. So it's a fascinating game, this marathon space. Yeah, but that's
Yeah.
that's sort of the
Yeah.
summary of the speed block now.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, I was really enjoying your episodes you were putting out before they went on your under your Patreon service, but the ones where you were talking with your coach at the time, kind of about the ins and outs of your training for the speed block, and that was really interesting to hear. Kind of I kind of was thinking the same thing when you were struggling to break 220. Was like maybe there's something missing there with the speed itself. I know there were theories around kind of like the maybe some neuromuscular issues where like
Yeah.
it's more of a neuromuscular issue than anything else with the cramping. Um, how do you think that theory played out? Because like you still had some of that cramping in the marathons. So
Yeah. So the
yeah.
hope was the speed work would not only make me faster and more efficient over all the paces I needed to run, but also stop the cramping. Now, it definitely did the
Mhm.
first thing, but it didn't really do the second thing.
Yeah.
And but with that said, I feel like the cramping has been a little bit improved, but that might just be because I've only got two marathons as a sample size to work with. I
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
know. It's not enough to know
Mhm. Mhm.
if it really did help or not. Because in Chicago and Indianapolis, the cramping was pretty bad, but I don't think it was as bad as it has been in the past. But
Mhm.
with
Mhm.
that said, the cramping, man, is such a mysterious thing. I mean, I'm 21
Yeah.
marathons in now. I've cramped in every single one, at least every single one that I've gone all out in, and it's really random and strange how it strikes, and it's almost
Mhm.
hard. It's still hard for me to really correlate anything with it. So yeah, it definitely did help me move. Basically, it helped me run a lot easier and more efficiently at 5:15 marathon pace or 5:17 marathon pace. I
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
noticed in July, August when I started to switch over to marathon training that 5:05 to 5:15 pace was it had changed. It had shifted,
Mhm.
and I was in a place where that was a lot more efficient. I did a few
Yeah.
workouts where I really kind of surprised myself in August. There was one
Mhm.
where it was 10 by a K. There was another one where I went 4 miles, 3 miles, 2 miles, 1 mile, all at about 5:12, 5:13 mile pace,
Mhm.
with a mile in between at like 5:45, I think. So it wasn't really an
Yeah.
easy recovery. And these workouts made me think, wow, I'm definitely move the needle forward. And I was just
Mhm.
hoping going into Chicago that this neuromuscular stimulus I'd given myself with the sprints would fend off the cramping because there
Mhm.
was a little bit of evidence online to show that might happen, but
Mhm.
unfortunately not really. I still cramped up a little bit in both races, but I feel like I didn't
Yeah.
lose anywhere near as much time as I normally lose at the end of marathons this time around.
Yeah.
So it obviously helped a bit, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like, I think either way, despite the fact that you still had some cramping, like, there's still so much to gain from you working on your speed, and I think that's a very commonly underlooked thing, especially in the marathon. I mean, I think people underlook speed when it comes to that. I mean, I think it's huge. You'll hear David Roach praise speed work, who recently set the course record at the Leadville 100 miler and then followed that up by winning the Javelina 100 miler, I think, in Phoenix, Arizona. So the dude's a beast, and you should check out his podcast if you haven't. Some Work All Play. It's a good podcast, and they're very like science based. But he praises speed work like nobody's business, and he's like doing 100 milers. So it's like people maybe you got to start thinking a little bit more about the speed people because he talks about how he does strides every week like after easy runs 3 or 4 times a week like he does them a lot and he's going like sub 4 minute mile pace and he says to be as good as he is he thinks he needs to be able to run under 4 minute mile and he thinks he could and I
Wow.
kind of believe him because he's crazy. So it's certainly like something to check out if you haven't like followed his journey much. Like it's very interesting to hear that, and so it's refreshing to hear you kind of saying the same things. So I'm glad that you kind of like started thinking about doing that and working with your coach on that. Because you gotta take advantage of that kind of intrinsic speed you have. Like I mean, I know it's been a while since you're 800 um, running, but like I think it's still there deep down. Like you're obviously built with some fast twitch muscle fibers in your body, so you gotta use them since you have them. But yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. And I was going on Let's Run last night because I was like you were talking about how people hate on you, and I was like, how could they hate on him? I don't get it. And people are saying like you're trying to go out too hard, and so that's why you're cramping. I'm like, that's not it at all. Like if you look at his training, like the guy is going to run under 220. Like it's people are saying some crazy stuff about you, man. That blew my mind.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh man, there's all sorts of funny. There's someone on there saying that I can't go to Finland because the police are after me, whereas I just went there and I'm going again in a few months. So I don't know. I don't know what that's about. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff on Let's Run that people are making up. But anyways, yeah, who knows if it's about going out too hard?
Yeah,
it could be the case, but I don't think so. I think it's something else. I think there's some other
yeah.
issue, but I do really wonder if I just haven't done quite enough of this speed yet. And I think
Mhm.
that might be a solution to just sort of keep doing what I'm doing and see if that
Yeah.
eventually works the cramping situation. Because I do think it's improved a little bit for sure
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
there were definitely some situations in the last few years where the cramping struck and I just couldn't keep the pace. Whereas now I almost can
Yeah.
keep a pretty similar pace. And you said before that, and we can get to this in more detail, but you said at Indianapolis, I was on pace for 216 and the cramping crippled me. The
Hmm.
cramping wasn't the only thing that crippled me. I was legitimately starting to struggle a little bit. And I don't think I
Hmm.
would have run 216 if I didn't cramp. I think if I didn't cramp,
Hmm.
I may have snuck under 218. I think if I avoided the cramps somehow, I think 217 mid to high would
Hmm.
have come out. I knew at about 15, 16 miles, I was not going to be able to hold that pace. So I actually pulled back a tiny bit and let the pack go that I
Yeah.
was running with. Yeah, but we can get into that more. So
Yeah.
it wasn't only the cramping that crippled the 216. I genuinely think I probably was not in 216 shape. I think it was more like 217. But then the muscles were in 218 shape. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
No, I mean, I definitely disagree with people though, like going out and saying stuff like that. Like you were obviously in the shape to do under 220, and that was not ambitious by any means. Like we all knew you could do that. So I just, man, people are crazy. And I guess I mean, it comes like you said in past chats on your podcast where it comes with having a following. Um,
yeah,
people are going to hate, people are going to prey on your downfall. It's just how it is. So, but man,
yeah.
I was like cracking up looking at Let's Run post last night. I was like, these people, man, like they got nothing better to do than hate on you. I don't get it. But uh, anyway,
I,
let's.
I actually think I've listened to a podcast with Brooks Beasts Danny Mackey a
Yeah,
while ago,
yeah,
and
yeah.
he had some period apparently several years ago where he was getting hated on. I don't know what it was about, and he ended up concluding that he figured out somehow through some method that it was mostly like one or two people that were just using multiple
Mm,
IP addresses that were pretending to be lots of people.
yeah,
So it's
yeah,
quite possible it's like one or two people. I don't know. I'm not sure,
yeah.
but yeah,
That's
I know that's the thing. Yeah,
good. Man. I can have a whole another podcast on that, but we won't get into that.
yeah,
So so I guess let's go to Chicago real quick, and we won't spend. I guess we won't have to spend too much time on this part because I have some like fun stuff at the end. I kind of want to pick your brain about, but
yeah.
um, so let's start with just generally speaking. So you come off that 5 month speed development block, we'll call it, where you kind of end it running that 417. Um, Going into the Chicago block, kind of what did the kind of how did the training transform for you? I know you mentioned you kind of kept that speed in, but I'd like to hear more about that, about
Mm.
your breakdown of the training.
Yeah. So it was about 5.5 months of speed, and then there was about a sort of 3 to 4 week transition period, and then 10 weeks of marathon specific training. And I really noticed that as soon as I started introducing more of that marathon pace work, the LT1 threshold work, if you want to call it anything exactly. So it's basically the first point at which your lactate production starts to rise. I wasn't really measuring that at all. I've run for so long now and done so many workouts by feel. I guess I was fortunate. I'll say that word fortunate that I was introduced to running before GPS watches were really a thing back in 2006. They were a thing, but they were really bad at that point. They weren't very good. And
Yeah,
so the reason
yeah,
why I'm saying that is I was introduced to running and spent my first several years of running by feel. So everything was in my head. How do I feel? Rate of perceived exertion out of 10, etc. And so this marathon pace stuff I can sort of do. I can tell where it is feeling wise. But it didn't take long. It took 3 or 4 weeks before I really noticed um, that stuff was coming back very well. That LT1 long progressive sort of steady state work was really coming back to me fast. And I remember doing that workout, the 4-3-2-1 miles. I think it was at the very first week, or maybe at the second week of the marathon specific block. And I did it a lot faster than I thought I would because I ran it to feel. And
mm,
it was at that point when I thought to myself, man, that day, I'd love to go back and figure out the date. I think it was early August, but on that day, I realized how powerful the speed stuff was, and how you actually, when you do a lot of training at one intensity over many years, you also don't lose it very easily. I found, at least,
mm,
because I hadn't really done a lot of that LT1 marathon effort stuff between January and July. I'd touched on it a little bit in some long runs, but not that much. But it
yeah,
came back very fast. And I think that was as a result of doing so much of it between 2019 and 2023.
yeah,
Who knows? because that might not really be the case for people that have maybe just done 2 or 3 marathon builds and are just getting into their third one. That might not be the case. But yeah, I noticed that then, and I even had Christian Ulrichsen, I'll give him a shout out, Norwegian podcaster with a big following. He's trying to break 220. He commented on that particular run and said, "You should race now." And I was like, "That's," and he's very educated. He's one of Renato Canova's like good friends, and
Yeah.
he's helped coach Sondre Moen, who's run 205. Um, and when he said that, I was like, "That's so ironic that he said that," because I feel like even after 3 or 4 weeks of marathon, even transition to marathon training, I was almost in PB shape. I felt like.
Yeah.
And so the shape came very quickly from that speed stuff. And now I almost wonder if it's best for me to train like a 3K miler up until like
Mm.
6, 7 weeks before the marathon and then just do like a quick
Hmm.
6 week block. That might even be the best thing for me. But I
Yeah.
love this game because there's so much to experiment with. And luckily, I'm not too old yet. I'm still sub 38 years. So I've got a few more years to experiment with this stuff. But I think in one of the next build ups next year, I want to try doing speed up until quite close to the marathon, and then doing maybe 6 weeks of high volume and specific work. This time it was more like
Hmm.
10 weeks, but I want to even see if that it's shortening that. And I say that because I switched into great shape very quickly after transitioning from the speed stuff. So yeah, I'm stoked that I can still experiment with this stuff in the next few years and report back to everyone online that's still following along. And
Yeah.
the Let's Run guys.
I'll certainly be following along, but yeah, no, I mean, like it doesn't take much. Like you said, you spend so much time kind of building out your aerobic base, doing all that threshold work, a lot of marathon pace specific work, spending more time in your marathon blocks running marathon pace, where you just where you develop such an efficiency for that and like really build out your base that it doesn't take much to maintain that. I mean, like like you said, like I'd be curious to see how what marathon you could run just coming right off your speed block personally. But I mean, I'd imagine like it doesn't take much to maintain that, and like just touching on like every couple weeks doing like a bigger long run or something could be enough to maintain those gains while you kind of really focus on the speed. Like it's not like you need to be doing um, stuff every week for at marathon pace during the speed development block to maintain your kind of that aerobic fitness. I think people kind of worry that if they kind of step too far away from something, they're going to lose it, but it's not really how it works. And so that was kind of something I implemented with one of my athletes I coach is like we just we took a step away from the marathon for just a small little dedicated block to speed, and like he's like crushing it now, and like
Mm.
he's crushing it, like it's insane. Like it looks like he just took a whole nother, he just stepped up a whole nother level. So I think it's something.
Can you dive into that a little bit? I'm curious. So, what exactly have you done? And congrats to you for implementing something that's maybe a little bit not against the norm, but just like trialing something. But yeah, if you could spend like a
Yeah,
minute or two, that'd be cool.
yeah, for sure. I mean, so for background, he was, I mean, he was an okay marathoner. Like, I mean, he came from a bodybuilding background, so he has a very unique running background. He only got into running like in his like late adulthood after like getting married, so like mid 30s maybe. And so he was running a lot of marathons. Eventually he reached out to me. He was actually my past physical therapist when I lived in York, Pennsylvania. um and he wanted some help, so I decided to lend him a helping hand, and so we started working on stuff. He really had no experience with speed or anything, so I was kind of slow to introduce him to those things because I guess you kind of got to be a little careful with that. But also like with someone who's like used to only doing some marathon pace stuff and that's really it, everything's gonna feel hard, so you can't really. It doesn't make sense to necessarily throw them up some really fast stuff. So once he built some general speed, though, I was like, okay, I think it's time to really like dive into this a little bit more. He had a lot of at that point, he had done a lot of strides, a lot of hill sprints, and so I felt comfortable kind of introducing him to like a dedicated kind of 5K block. Down the road, I'd consider maybe doing even a mile, like a mile block with him. But you got to work those athletes into those things a little bit slower than someone who like already like competed from high school till now or whatever, like me. So yeah, I mean, honestly, like I just thought he was ready for that, and I thought there was a lot to gain from focusing on a 5K block because up, up until that block, I mean, he did some 5K work because I have a funnel periodization approach to training. So I mean, of course, like I kind of start at 5K you know, threshold, and then I kind of like convene and eventually get to like the marathon specific stuff. But
Yeah,
I just thought it made sense. It was time to kind of work on his speed because I didn't think he was stagnating, but I was like, I think this is kind of something that you can do now. And so we did it. He spent uh it wasn't that long, but it was like 10 weeks or something, maybe 2.5, 3 months working on his speed, doing a lot more 5K stuff. I didn't give him much slower work, like kind of we were talking about before. You don't need a lot of that. He has already this huge base because he just did so many marathons and like easy running and long runs and all that, and worked out. So um, I think there's a
that's
lot
awesome.
to it. Yeah, and down the road for sure, definitely gonna throw him in some miles and stuff. I think it could be fun. See what he can do. I mean, he's in a very unique position where like he could probably improve a lot in the speed department even at his age, just because he's like a newer runner. So yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
uh,
that's awesome. Thanks for sharing, man. That's super interesting. I feel like it really makes you realize that there's not a one size fits all approach to marathons. I mean, that's obvious, really, but you really do have to study the person's background and understand where their strengths and weaknesses are and where they might be in their journey. It's absolutely critical if
yeah,
you want to get the most out of that person. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. I mean, he's like so he just for a little more context, he ran 3:11 in the marathon, maybe a year back at the Gettysburg Marathon, which is I won't get into it, but it was a mess. Um, wouldn't necessarily recommend it to someone to sign up for, but
oh
anyway,
damn,
but anyway, I mean, just not a spectator friendly course, very hilly. It was raining, it was pouring, downpour the whole time, which is that's not at the fault of the race coordinators. That's not their fault. It's just you can't control the weather. But anyway, I
yeah,
mean,
damn.
but now he's running his marathon pace stuff at like 6:45, 6:40 mile. Like, I mean, which is a significant jump. Like for context, like that's like a almost over a 30-second per mile jump from what the pace is for running a 3:11 marathon. Uh,
Yeah,
so, and I actually largely attribute that to the speed block, but also the fact that he has more life stability now, which is something we talked about with you earlier. I mean, his job changed, and now it's just easier for him. Life's a little easier, like less stress. Because it place is closer to his home, like so less of a commute, and he's just less stressed. So I think like that plus the speed plays a big part. But that's my
sounds
spiel.
sounds like it sounds like one of he's doing exactly the same as me.
Yeah, 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 exactly. Yeah, right. Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So that's something like I think I'm glad that you're kind of looking into the speed thing now, and like hopefully we'll see maybe some more improvements over time in the marathon for you. Um, so okay, we I think we've touched on things pretty well and like your marathon blocks. I guess one thing I was curious about was first of all, you did do some pretty high mileage weeks. You were talking about how you were hitting 100+ mile weeks for was it over a month? Was it like 5 weeks or something?
Six weeks.
Six. Yeah. So and also the fact that you're now on the East Coast. Well, you're in Chicago, not the East Coast, but uh, I mean it is hotter and more humid than what you were used to, like running in Colorado, right? So I mean. There must have been an adjustment period there because you mentioned in one of your Instagram posts where it was you were certainly kind of battling the heat a little bit, and that it's definitely tough to do those
Just
miles.
one.
Yeah,
I feel like I complained a lot more than once.
yeah, yeah, I guess
That's
you
probably
did. But could you speak to that a little bit? Like, how did you combat the fact that you are somewhat of a heavier sweater from my understanding, and also the fact that like, don't take this the wrong way, but you do have a relatively bigger build compared to like a lot of other
mm,
marathoners who are running similar times to you. So, and that's also going to play a part in like your sweat rate and all that. So, like, how did you deal with the hotter temperatures? Was there anything you were doing for that?
I didn't deal with it very well, to be honest. I had a few little breakdowns, but I don't want to sound too, my wife's Palestinian, so when I do start to struggle with something so simple, I start to think about the
Yeah,
hardships people are going through around the world, and I try and put myself back into a proper reality check. But across
yeah.
the board, I did find the training pretty tough over the summer. There was a fair few days where I was really dreading getting out the door. In fact, that was a lot, especially on the harder workouts.
Hmm.
I think the weird thing for me is I don't want to dive into this too much because it's a bit of a strange thing, but I got heat stroke in the end of 20. I think it was the end of 2015. It was when I was living in Singapore, anyways. I did a triathlon relay. I was doing the half marathon leg. I was not in any shape at the time, and I struggled with some heat stroke at the end of that race, and almost was hospitalized. And ever since that day, I've had this, and I've actually looked into this a fair bit. People that do struggle with heat stroke, it's actually a permanent injury that sort of stays with you for life. And you basically have these weird signals in the back of your mind that when you start to get to that point again, you get all these almost like warning signals of like, don't go there, don't go there. That's sort of the feeling that you get in the back of your mind. And there was a fair few
Yeah.
runs and workouts in the last summer where I stopped, towards the middle to end stages of the run, and cut it short. It didn't happen too many times, but I did also utilize the treadmill indoor a lot. Very lucky that in my apartment building I had a little gym with 3 treadmills. I actually also reached out to that Omius headband company. I don't have any sponsorship with them, but they sent me one of those cooling headbands. I think that
Yeah.
helped a little bit, not that much. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a game changer, but it probably helped cool me a couple of percent, perhaps.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think I think I've said 5% or 10%, and that might be accurate. But otherwise, I was lucky to have my wife Reem ride with me in a fair few workouts with a bottle of ice water to throw over my head from time
Nice.
to time. And
Yeah.
it's interesting because even though I complained and struggled a lot through summer and whinged about it a lot, I think that heat training actually was very beneficial for the racing, because in Chicago 5 weeks ago now, 4.5 weeks ago, when I ran my first sub 220, it was about 59, 58 degrees, I think, at the start, and about 87% humidity. And if you'd said to me earlier in the year, do you think you could break 220 in that? I would say, no, probably not. That's just way too warm for me. But I think the reason why I could was because I trained in much warmer almost every single day in the lead up to it. And interestingly enough, I ran side by side with another Australian in Chicago Marathon, Brady Thrillful from the Inside Running podcast. He's run 219 twice before, and he did his whole build up in Australia in a very cold place in Victoria, which is typically
Mm.
40s, high 40s, mid 40s. And he was probably in 217, 216 shape, in my opinion, based on his Strava. I'll give him
Mhm.
credit
Mhm.
for actually getting into much better shape than he actually produced. But at the very end of the race, he finished about 55 seconds behind me, I think. The first thing he said was he found it hard because of the conditions he trained in. And that was that at that point, I realized how beneficial the heat training actually was for
Mhm.
me,
Mhm.
because I trained in 70, 80 degrees, 20 to 25 degrees Celsius every day in the lead up,
Mhm.
basically. And so then when it was 59, it was almost a drop down, even though in the past, historically, that's been hard for me to deal with. So the heat training's a real thing. It definitely helps, even though it's tough. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you tinker at all with like electrolyte consumption? Like, were you taking more electrolytes in during those 100+ mile weeks where you're dealing with that heat, or like anything like
Uh,
that?
yeah, I was taking some electrolyte tablets. I feel like
Yeah.
the electrolyte thing is something that I haven't really gotten very good at or knowledgeable at. And
Mhm.
every marathon I run when I cramp, I have at least 10 people message me about sodium and magnesium. And
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
tricky thing is, so someone messaged me last night, and said, very nice message. He said, "Hey man, I've watched your videos. I think that you just haven't quite experimented with high enough sodium." And I wrote back saying, "Thank you. Tell me what you mean by high enough." And he goes, "Well,
Mhm.
I've started to take 1,800 milligrams per hour in the race. Now that's really high." And he
Yeah.
he said he said that that's fixed his cramping. And my
Mm.
my mind
Mhm.
went to, and so I've typically been taking about 750 milligrams an hour. So
Okay.
he's taking 250% of that.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
the first thought that came to my mind was, how do I actually physically carry that and consume it at this speed? That's the
Mhm.
challenge, because I don't have at Chicago Marathon. I wasn't in the elite field. I didn't have the bottles at the tables. So how do
Yeah.
I then
Mhm.
actually get in that much salt? I can't exactly be popping pills running 5 12 mile pace, 5 15 mile pace. That's
Mhm.
hard to do. To actually
Yeah.
consume a tablet with water, that's not easy to do. So then it
Yeah.
comes down to a logistical equation, like how do you actually get this sodium in the
Yeah.
mouth? And so I'm trying
Yeah.
to work that out, and I do want to experiment more with that next year, much
Yeah.
higher doses of sodium. But it's probably going to mean I can only do that at a race where I have bottles in the elite field every 5K,
Yeah.
because then I can
Yeah.
put in maybe like 700 milligrams into every single bottle. No, that'd be too much. I'll work out the math later, but you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah.
But that,
Yeah.
that can only be possible if I have a drink on the table every 5K. Now I'm in that tricky situation at 220 to 218 where I'm not always in the elite field. I sometimes don't make
Mm.
that
Mhm.
elite field. And so, yeah, I mean, luckily now with the 218, I've probably got a higher chance of getting into elite fields, but I'm
Yeah.
going to have to test that next year. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Like I actually was talking with my athlete I was mentioning earlier about that, like yesterday, because we're trying to figure out how we can get his sodium like or electrolyte consumption at a level that we're happy with for the Philadelphia Marathon, which is coming up in a couple weekends. And that's the difficulty of being like a non-elite runner because we don't have the privilege of like the table with all
Yeah.
the good the like being because being able to consume liquid like it's so much easier to get in carbs and electrolytes. It's much harder to do that when you just have you're just carrying gels on you and maybe you're gonna try to pop some electrolyte capsules, but he's gonna do that, and I'm like, that sounds a little tricky to like swallow a pill while you're racing. I don't think I would want to do that, but I mean, I don't know. I mean, these are the things that you have to consider, like you're saying. I mean, it's a part of not being an elite runner, like, and so what I don't know. Sometimes like I people will advise you to have all these electrolytes and carbs, and it's like yeah, but like most of us don't have the bottles, so that how do we do that? I don't know if I personally think there might not be sufficient like advice for those people out there. Like
Mhm.
these nutritionists and stuff that I don't know if they're fully understanding like we don't have the bottles. Like
Yeah, I
you know what I
agree.
mean?
It's something that
Yeah.
very few people think about. It's like, okay, it's
Yeah.
one thing to say take in 1,500 milligrams of sodium, but it's like, okay, well, logistically, tell me how I'm going to do that. It's
Yeah.
actually not very easy. There is
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah.
There is ways, but all the ways are a challenge.
Yeah.
And so you have to think: is the challenge going to be worth the loss of time, the cramping? It then
Yeah.
comes down to a trade off. Like,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
because a few people have recommended in Australia, a lot of Australian football players have been utilizing pickle juice for cramping for some reason, and this has become a popular known strategy. But the thing
Mm.
is they typically get substituted from the ground. They sit on the bench and then they take the pickle juice. And I'm like, yeah, well, that's easy, isn't it? Like, I can't just stop, have a break for a minute, take some pickle juice. And by the way, pickle juice would be brutal to take in a marathon, man. Like,
Oof.
that taste would be rough. And you've run plenty of races. At the end of a race, you're often on the borderline of wanting to vomit. And if you put in
Mm.
something like that, oh, the loss of time from the vomiting may outweigh the loss of time from the cramping. So you got to factor in all these things.
And when you're vomiting, you're losing all the stuff you were just consuming. So there's that
Exactly.
too.
You're also possibly losing all the carbs you just took in.
Yeah.
So yeah, exactly right.
Yeah, yeah. I think so all right, well we'll see how that goes for you kind of like maybe experimenting with that down the road cuz like you're in that place right now where you are kind of in that experimentation phase where you're tinkering and trying to fine tune to get the most out of yourself. And it sounds like you still want to continue to pursue the marathon because I guess one of the things I was wondering is like what is next for you? But it sounds like
Mm.
you want to try to go faster.
Motivation is high now because I feel like I've figured out what moved the needle forward for me, and I guess I'm now curious to see if I repeat that multiple times, will the needle keep
Mhm.
moving forward? And no one knows the answer to that question, not even me. Yeah, next is hopefully Osaka Marathon, February 24, which is a bit of a tight turnaround, so I'm taking a small break now. That will be dependent on whether my US visa is processed in time, which is a bit stressful, but it looks like it will. And the backstory of that is I've applied for a green card, and you can leave the country, but if you leave the country while the green card's being processed, you abandon the process, and then you have to
Okay.
restart it if you enter it again. And I've already spent $4,500 and spent 5 months, 8 months of waiting. And apparently, if you do that, they question you, being like, "Why?" US is really
Yeah.
tight with
Yeah.
with looking at international stuff. So anyways, that
It's gonna
looking
get
like it will be
tighter.
processed in time. Yeah, exactly. Now that Trump's in, it'll get even tighter. So hopefully that gets processed. If the visa doesn't get processed before Osaka, I'll have to look for another marathon in the fall. I'm not actually sure what the backup plan is at this point, but I'll do Houston half before that in the lead up. It'd be good to
Okay.
finally get a half marathon PB because mine still is from a few years ago. I raced a half in the lead up to Chicago, but I didn't run it very well and I just missed my best.
Mm.
So yeah, that's sort of coming up, and then after that, I'm not super sure. Uh, yeah, I haven't really planned next year yet properly, but I do have to because I'm sure as a coach you're noticing that these big marathons, man, they sell out like really early, and the
For
elite
sure.
fields fill up really early. So I do now that you're asking me this question, you've actually made me realize I better get my plan ready for next year. So I haven't really fully thought about it. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, for sure they do. They definitely do. Even the Philadelphia Marathon sold out so fast. So
man.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
I registered very early for the half marathon and like it sold out quick. So I was like, man, I'm glad I did it early. You really do have to know very well in advance now with how fast these races sell out, which I mean, I think is good for the sport. Obviously it's becoming more popular. People are kind of getting into the marathon more. So I think all in all, it's a good thing. But
Oh
yeah,
yeah,
good.
for
Always
sure.
good to kind of know in advance kind of what you're doing the next year. I at least I always like to have like at least a year planned in advance, so you kind of have that mapped out. Um,
Yeah.
but
I think the
yeah,
reason why I haven't planned that much is because of the visa thing. Like
yeah,
sometimes
yeah,
if you make errors on the visa or you miss things, they'll send you a letter like 3 months after you've sent in, and they'll be like, "Hey, you forgot this one thing," and that can delay like 3 to 6 months. And
oh
so because I
gosh,
don't know if I can leave the US or not next year, it's hard to plan. So as soon as
yeah,
that visa
yeah,
comes in, I think I'll be able to lock in plans. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. Well, I personally would like to see you maybe have at it with another mile
that's a
block.
delay there. Yeah.
What's that? Sorry.
As soon as oh, sorry, I think my internet cut out a little bit there.
Oh, it did.
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, sorry about that. So yeah, I'm definitely. I mean, before every single marathon moving forward, I will be doing a mile block. That worked for me.
Mm,
Whether I'll race a mile at the end of that, I don't know. So now that you say that, like, I'm actually going to start another mile block at the end of next week. So I'm going to
okay.
take 2 weeks off, and then I'm going to train again for the mile 3K for about 8 weeks, and then switch over to marathon work for about I think I'll then have 7 weeks up, do a firm, very strict speed block before switching to marathon because that just clearly worked for me this year. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I like to see you like try to get down closer to like 410. I mean, I think like it can only help you. I mean, like you said, like we talked about, you have the road base. So we'll see how that fares for you. I think that's definitely something to explore. So cool. All right, with the last like I mean, how about do you have time to go a little bit past an hour?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Okay. We'll spend maybe the next like 15 minutes tops. Just running through. I have some fun little topics, so like just kind of want to get your quick thoughts on them. Um, so
Sure.
so I'm just kind of gonna like throw buzzwords out, and then I just like get your thoughts on them, and maybe I'll chip in, but like I'll try to shut up for the most part. So
I love it.
okay. So
Let's do it.
all right. So first of all, like you probably guess this one, double threshold.
Definitely seems to work for many people, but I think it's also a little bit risky if you're new to the game.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Continuous lactate monitoring.
Ooh, yeah, this is going to be a big deal. I don't know if that's already a thing or not, but when lactate devices first started to get more popular, I always thought to myself, this is a little bit of a inefficient way to do it.
Mhm.
Stop in the middle of the workout, get your blood sample, and then sweat can get in the way, and that can alter the lactate reading. I feel like when
Yeah.
we get to a point where it's a little device where it's continuously telling us where our lactate is, that could be a game changer for racing as well. To be able to notice where your lactate is in a given time in the race, knowing what you can sustain by testing, yeah, that could be a big deal. So, yeah, anything more you know about that, let me know.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's in the works by some companies, but like I mean, it's not going to be anytime soon, but I mean, I'd imagine within the next few years we'll see something come out. That's my prediction. Certainly exciting to me because like man, it's probably going to be expensive, but like it would be nice to have certainly, and I think if a lot of people will take advantage of that, like sub elite and elite, and even people not sub elite, like I think it make a huge difference in people's training, like being able to kind of like have that hard data on your metrics. I mean, like for someone like you and I, like who are very like well acquainted with our bodies and kind of working off of RPE or rating and perceived exertion, I maybe it's less beneficial. But like for the newer runners and stuff, or like people less experienced or less acquainted with their bodies and their effort levels, I think it'll be really beneficial. We might just see it benefiting people like you and I a little less, but something I'm still
I
excited
agree with
about.
that.
Yeah.
You've nailed it there. So
Yeah.
I had this imagination in 10 years to having a lactate monitor, a glucose monitor, and
Mhm.
a little pouch of glucose, all at the watch. And then when the glucose runs low, it automatically pumps glucose into your body via an intravenous drip, which by the way is illegal under World Athletics rules. So this is not a very good idea. and then and then the lactate device can tell you that you're going too fast. we'll just be like a robot running. It'll be great.
Oh my gosh. That's yeah, yeah, there's a point where it's like, maybe we gotta slow down here, like,
Let's go back to the 90s and just run with our old fizz. Yeah,
yeah, right, yeah, like, the purists versus the progressives, like, yeah, I guess that's, yeah, but certainly exciting to think about kind of these techs coming out, like, maybe next few years. All
yeah,
right, next one, sodium bicarbonate.
yeah. I haven't tried it yet. Definitely keen to try it next year for sure. Seems like it's a bit of a buzz at the moment. Mawson obviously have their product. There's a few other brands that have come out focusing solely on that. I've heard mixed things. Some people think it's helped. Some people think it hasn't. Some people think it helps cramping. So that's definitely why I'm
Yeah,
more curious to use it. I tried it a couple of times back in the 800-meter days, and I used like a
okay,
really raw, like made at like homemade thing that my friend made, and it was pretty rough on my stomach, and I didn't use it
yeah,
again. So yeah,
yeah. Yeah, that's something I would like to educate myself on more because I'm just it's like baking soda. So I'm like, how I guess what is Morton and these other companies doing with it to make it more digestible? I guess there's probably some additives in it or something to help with digestion, I'd imagine. So definitely not just
yeah.
baking soda mixed up in water or whatever.
That's what I did in 2009. I think it was. I did
Is
did that.
it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I don't know. I don't think
Well,
that would go well for me.
no, it was brutal. I did a few workouts with it. I think maybe it was two, and I just remember vomiting
Yeah,
like heavily after both, and I was like,
yeah.
this is not for me. Yeah.
It's it's not really affordable either. I mean, it's $70 for the Morton ones. Like that and it's like 4 servings or something crazy. I mean, it's absurd. I mean, it's more expensive than ketones, like which I kind of think is on the edge of not being affordable for a lot of people.
Oh yeah,
But yeah, it's $70, man, for like 4 servings is crazy. I mean, I could never justify that personally, but David Roach
yeah.
swears by it. He like takes it a lot. So he
Okay.
swears by it on his podcast. He talks about how he thinks it really helps him even at the 100-mile distance. So obviously there's benefits even at those longer distances, despite the fact that like I guess it's mostly for lactate buffering, like for like faster speeds. Like certainly like the 800 is probably where like we'll see it
Mm,
making significant improvements in people's times. Like I imagine like maybe in the next couple of years we'll see times dipping even lower than what we've been seeing the last year. And I probably guess a lot of people started using bicarb this last year when people were starting to dip down on like the 141s. But I guess we'll see what happens with that.
we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Next one. Heavy carb consumption of like 90 plus grams per hour in the marathon.
Yeah, I try and go for 100. This is depending on your weight for sure. Do not follow anyone else blindly. Make sure you think about your weight, and also it's critical if you want to aim for a high amount of carbohydrates per hour or high amount of carbohydrates in general. You need to be practicing, practicing, practicing. And if you're the type of person that has concluded that your stomach doesn't handle carbs very well, my suggestion is to change that attitude and to start actually going into workouts where you try and push your stomach to the limit of breaking with a toilet nearby. Do some reps around around a area where there's maybe a toilet there, and
Yeah.
breaking your stomach and getting to the point of hitting the toilet is winning. That's you're training
Yeah.
your stomach. That's not. Don't look at that as a bad thing. That's actually a good
Mhm.
thing. And so, yeah, I know a few athletes that are currently that I'm working with that are doing that, and carbohydrates are key in the marathon, man, for sure.
Yeah, the gut is like any other, bodily like organ or what have you. It's I mean it's trainable like everything else. So
It
I
really is.
yeah,
Yeah,
I agree with you. Like you might think I wouldn't be so quick to call yourself like someone who can't handle carbs or something. Like definitely experiment with that. Try different gels. Like if a gel doesn't work for you right away, that doesn't mean it's not going to work for you. Like you might have to do a few long runs with that gel to like notice, oh, maybe this is fine. It's just my body getting used to it. Um, so I
correct.
like the precision ones personally, the precision gels. You got me on
Yep.
precision, and they're very good. Like there's a little like lemon taste, and it's like really easy, goes down, pretty liquidy. Um, that's my personal recommendation. Everyone listening.
Yeah, yeah, they're good for sure. Yeah, I've
Yeah,
tried a lot of gels. There's a lot of good ones out there, and you're
yeah,
exactly right
always
when
good.
you say if you've decided after one attempt that one thing doesn't work for you, it's not true.
Yeah,
You got to keep at it. Yeah, eventually your
and
stomach will figure it out.
and also like you just dropped like $50 on gels. Like
Yeah,
that'd be hard for me to justify like throwing the 28 out there if I try to and it doesn't work. So gels
yeah,
aren't cheap. Like running nutrition isn't cheap, but it's something that is 100% worth it. And I think it's I think it's like going to be the next thing, along with maybe biomechanics. So I guess we'll see where the pendulum swings. Um,
Mm.
all right, next one, treadmill running. And I
Mm.
would like to hear your thoughts on steep uphill treadmill running for like a more of a threshold stimulus.
Hmm. Treadmill running, I think, is definitely very beneficial because well, one, obviously, when you want to avoid severe weather, that's really helpful. I think on easy runs, it's really useful. I only really added additional mileage this year in those 6 weeks that we spoke about earlier on the treadmill. I probably added another 25 to 30 miles a week just doing second runs in the afternoon. Usually it's just 10K or just over 6 miles, or maybe 4 days a week.
Yeah.
And that was awesome because it's lower impact. I feel like I was recovering better, but people also, notably, no one you'd be having to live under a rock if you didn't notice Jakob Ingebrigtsen using the treadmill often for his threshold stuff. And I've noticed also Lewis Gravalia, I think I'm saying his name correctly, and some
Grijalva,
others.
I think. Grijalva.
Grijalva, yeah, sorry,
Uh,
yeah, I
yeah.
butchered that. But yeah, he also posts quite a bit on Instagram, or at least from time to time, that he's doing some faster stuff on the treadmill. Yeah, it seems to be a thing for sure. I don't really think there's a massive difference between running outside and inside. I know people that have done 80% of their build-ups on a treadmill and still run very good marathons. So yeah, I think it's a useful tool for sure, especially when you want to lock into a specific pace. Speaking to the uphill part, I don't know. I'm going to say I don't feel educated or understanding to know really anything about that. I do know that doing short, fast hill sprints on the treadmill when it's very steep can be a risk to the hamstrings. I've heard about. So I was doing that quite a bit, and a couple of people actually said just be careful because there's people that have hurt their hamstrings doing this. And so I stopped doing them on the treadmill after that. I kept doing them outside. But
Yeah.
you were actually asking about tempo running slightly uphill. I mean, I feel like that'd be beneficial for sure, but I've never really
Yeah.
prescribed it or looked into it. But if you want to speak more to it, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I mean David Roche and his wife have talked about it on their podcast. I keep saying his name, gosh, but they're good. They talk about a lot of good stuff, and they are like they praise it. They say it's like they often like to use it as like on a double threshold day as the second stimulus for the day. And you don't even have to run that fast, so they'll tell their athletes to go on like a 15% grade. So it's like a really steep grade,
That's very
and
steep.
so and they'll tell you to start almost like walking. So you go like 3.5 4 miles per hour, and you don't have to get that fast for your heart rate to get really up there because it's like it's a huge cardiac output to be able to like go up a 15% grade already. And
Yeah.
so like people you're getting kind of that heart rate up real high, like to like that threshold level without having to run really fast. And so it's less stress on the body, and you can kind of sustain longer time doing it. Like so I don't know. It's something I haven't experimented with it either, but I mean, it's something that I'm interested in because I mean, as someone who's injury prone, like I think it could be beneficial. Instead of doing like a true lactate or double threshold day where you're like on the track twice, you know, in the morning and evening or what have you, like you're actually just getting on a treadmill and basically walking for 30 minutes or 40
Yeah.
minutes or whatever. I mean, it's interesting to me. But I think there's other ways to accomplish that too. Like you can do a bike workout or you can do like any other cross training modality. And that's something that I was doing for a while was like kind of experimenting with double threshold, but where the second session is not running. It's like a different
Mm.
threshold cross training stimulus. Yeah.
So I've got a little side point to this. In 2021, when I ran 220 in Indianapolis, 14. I trained for 14 weeks for that, and before that, I had 6 weeks totally off because my Achilles got very bad. And in that 6 weeks, I did a lot of like hiking in Colorado, a lot of hiking. This is when I first started the YouTube channel, literally at that point. And I was doing a lot of what you would call like threshold stuff up hills in the Colorado mountain range. I would do 2 to 3 hour hikes where a lot of it was at like really, really steep elevation. And when I came back to running after 6 weeks off running, but lots of hiking, I was like I was not in bad shape. I came back and was like
Mhm.
in pretty good shape pretty quickly. And so I actually learned then that this power hiking, okay, it wasn't a treadmill, but it was basically what you were describing. It's
Yeah.
really effective at keeping your aerobic capacity there. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a tool that people can use. It's something that don't overlook these sorts of like if you don't want to call them true workout, like running workout sessions. Like there's other ways to get a stimulus without kind of putting your body at risk of injury, like for those who are more injury prone or like maybe have some mechanical issues that puts more stress on their body. Um, anyway, let's keep going, or I can keep going.
Yeah.
Arm heart rate monitors versus like the chest straps.
I have no experience. I don't ever really use heart rate. I'm not really
Mm,
necessarily massively against it. I could speak
mhm,
for half an hour about the reasons why maybe not to use it, but I don't know.
mm.
I've never really used either. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Um, Passive heat training like sauna versus active heat training with like using a heat suit.
They seem to both be effective for sure. Yeah, I probably also can't speak specifically to any advanced science there, but they both seem to be worth doing if you want to prepare for a hot race. I think the ideal scenario is to just train in the heat, but of
Mhm,
course
mhm.
that's not something that people can just decide to do if they're working. Yeah, but
Yeah,
I see a
yeah,
professional athlete doing both, and they both seem to think it's effective. Yeah.
yeah. Definitely depends on where you live too. If you live in a hotter climate, you might not need to like do those kind of the active heat training modalities or even the passive. Like if you can get out the door and be intentional about running in those hotter temperatures, you can get that benefit without needing those additional kind of like tools or what have you. So it depends on
Yes.
where you live, I think. Um, So, okay, next one, training to power, like using
Mm.
for example, like a stride pod or something. I think you've talked about this a little bit before.
Yeah, I did use it for a little while there, and I think it's definitely beneficial. But I do still come back to the whole, if you are so advanced and so skilled at running by feel, I think that nothing can trump that.
Hmm.
But I do think that people that are starting running and they don't yet have that long experience with understanding where threshold is in their mind and all these sorts of things, I think that running to power is probably even better than running to pace or to heart rate because you're able to run. So power basically calculates your output and factors in elevation and all these sorts of things. And so if you set yourself to run at 350 watts, for example, when you run up the hill and you want to keep it at 350 watts, your pace will slow, but the power will stay the same because it understands the
Hmm.
elevation. And so, yeah, I think it's useful. But the only problem with that is you're constantly looking at a number and you're constantly running to a number. And my firm belief is that that's not ideal, but it is useful. So that's two things that you've got to hold in your head. I'm not saying that it's not. Yeah, I'm just saying that I think there's no better way than training to feel. And if you get really good at that, you're going to get the best out of yourself. But power can definitely be useful if you're learning how to get those intensities right. Yeah.
100%. Just kind of like what we were talking before with the continuous lactate monitoring and some of these other tools to monitor effort. Like it's probably going to be more beneficial for someone who isn't so like acquainted with their body and their effort levels. Um, but certainly something that like for people like you and I could still be beneficial. Like I've enjoyed using my stride pod. My neighbor let me borrow one because it's $250 and I didn't feel like buying one.
Mm,
It's nice to have. It's certainly nice to have because you can use it kind of as a secondary tool. Like at least that's how I use it. So I don't use it as the main driving thing. I use my rating of perceived exertion as the main driver behind effort, and then I kind of use the power just to make sure, okay, is my data that I'm seeing on my watch matching up kind of with how I'm feeling. I think that's kind of a good way to think about it. All right,
mm,
few more, and then we're done. So racing to fitness versus training to fitness. So I guess to elaborate, that would be, if you're racing to fitness, that would be where largely you're just doing a lot of races, so maybe like once every 2 weeks, and then you're keeping your workouts to a lower overall exertion level. So like maybe like 75 to 85%, 90% tops, versus training to fitness, which is what a lot of people do, especially in the marathon, where you're largely just training, and then you might throw in maybe 2 or 3 races in the block before the marathon just as tune-ups.
mm. Yeah, it depends what your goal is. Depends what you want to do. And I'm sorry, my internet's saying it's unstable again. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, yeah, it's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Sorry about that. Yeah, it depends what you want to do. I mean, it's funny because if you're one of the old school traditional marathon up and then racing once and then maybe racing a half in the middle, if you concluded that that's the way, then you're probably going to judge someone that races every week or every 2 weeks and does a 5K and 10K. I think that's stupid But my mind doesn't go there. My mind goes, well, maybe that person just loves to race, and their intention is not to necessarily run a fast marathon. That's it. Their intention is to meet a lot of people and to travel and to race and to do all these things. So we sometimes, you and I are both very ambitious, high performance type people. So our mind often goes to being like, every action should be leading to the ultimate performance in at some point in time. Not everyone is
Yeah.
built like that, and that's something that I think you people have to understand. That I coach some people that just want to race often. They want to race. They don't necessarily feel like they need to get the most out of themselves. They just love to run 5, 10, 10K races. So they do one every
Yeah.
2 or 3 weeks, and they train at a lower intensity, like you said. But then other people don't want to do that, and so it really depends what you want to do. And at the end of the day, one thing that I often forget, and that a lot of people forget, is we're just doing this really for fun and enjoyment. We're not doing it to try and make the Olympics. At least I'm not. I mean, some people listening might be, but I'm not. I don't think I have the ability or the talent to make the Olympics in the marathon. So I'm doing it just to get, to have fun and to experiment. And
Mhm.
I think it's important to understand that people in a slower category, they might just be doing it for. I mean, I was having this funny conversation last night with my wife, how she knows some people that have no idea how fast a 218 marathon is, but they do care about getting the 6 major marathon medals for, doing the 6 majors. And that's what's important to them,
Yep.
just finishing the race. They don't even remember what time they ran at, some of them. And that
Yeah,
makes you think, like, yeah, some people do this for the travel and the tourism, and that's fine. That's
for
not a
sure.
problem. Don't judge those people. That's just what they want to do. So I think
Yeah.
the short answer is it depends what you want to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I guess me personally, it's something that I would like to experiment with because I do like racing a lot. Like I that's the thing that I've always enjoyed the most. Like I've always been that person who's like, man, on the training, like I enjoy the process, I would say, but like I love the racing. Like that's the thing that I really like, and keeps me motivated. So it's something that I'd like to experiment with because I think it could still be for peak performance. You just have to think about it the right way, and maybe it's not every 2 weeks, but it's every like 3 or 4. So you can still train well. Um, I think I think it's something that could be worth looking into. Not I'm not saying for you. I'm just saying like it's for me, for
Yeah.
myself, I guess. Yeah.
Well, the best example of this at a professional level is Yuki Koichi, right? Who's a 207 Japanese guy. And he actually races probably 3 times a month. But the thing that people don't realize about him is that he doesn't hit all of his races at max effort. He
Hmm.
probably hits about one a month at max effort. And the other ones, he often does them at like, he'll run like a 219 marathon and then like 2 weeks later run like a 208. And so you realize, oh, maybe that 219, he didn't go flat out. Like he did it at like 80% effort. And
Hmm.
people often don't think about the fact that when you race, you don't have to go all out. It's a bit of a
Yeah.
phenomenon, right? You
Yeah.
can go 90%. So, yeah,
Yeah, I don't think I could not go all out in a race. That's
yeah,
me personally, but yeah,
too
no,
competitive.
for
Yeah,
sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right, couple more, we're done. So, second to last one, working on running biomechanics. I know this is something that you not necessarily have worked on much, so I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on it.
yeah. It's funny. You're asking me such questions that I really should probably be more educated at, but I feel like I've got to be honest and say I'm not. I think that biomechanics is something that you can definitely improve on, but it does take more time than most people realize to really implement those habits. I think, especially for someone that's been around for a long time and that it's been running for like me, I think it would be a real challenge for me to truly change my biomechanics. But I think the easiest way to do that without actually having to really think much is to do sprints, is to do hill sprints, and
Hmm.
to in those hill sprints that I've been doing every single week, practice good form, practice driving your body in a straight trajectory, practice good arm swing and not too much across the body and high knees. I think doing a lot of drills and thinking about changing your action is a very long road to changing that. And yeah, I mean, I would say that my biomechanics probably have changed a little bit this year just from the hill sprints. But I think what people don't realize is just doing some drills a couple of times is not going to move the needle. You need to be really relentless at it. And I've seen people successfully do that, but it takes a long time and a lot of practice.
Yeah, Paul Mackinnon has worked magic with me, so I'd be curious to see what he could do with you because not that your form isn't good, but I think maybe the
It's
arm
not
carry.
great though.
I think the arm carriage would probably be the first thing he would work on, is my theory. Um, I'd be curious because I think he could change your mind a little bit about some of these things. But I agree with
I
you
love
in
I
some
love
regards.
having my mind changed, so I'd
Yeah.
love to speak to him. Yeah,
Yeah, no, and I do agree with you though. Like the hill sprints and focusing on maintaining good form in that, and hill sprints encourage good form because it
yeah,
encourages that kind of that good knee drive and not too much extension in the back because you got to pick yourself up and keep going up the hill. So certainly, like I'm sure it helps. So I agree with you there. All right, last one, back-to-back marathons for non-elite
mm.
and elite runners alike.
So in your mind, back to back means how many weeks apart as a minimum?
I guess I would say within a month, like you did. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's something that's harder for people that are new to the game for a reason that's probably hard to really articulate. I think when you've done a lot of lifetime miles and you've been in the game a long time, you somehow recover a little bit faster and you seem to be able to your body is able to figure out how to recover faster and to back up easier. Because when I notice people that have started running 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, I've noticed a lot of people try and back up 4 or 5 weeks apart, and it very rarely works out. Whereas I've noticed a lot of people with a long history of running, doesn't necessarily always have to be in the marathon, but like a lot of mileage, they seem to be able to back up a little bit easier. I think there's a couple of crucial things that you need to do if you want to try that. So I knew before Chicago I was doing Indianapolis, and I was actually in the mindset before Chicago, in the days before that, I wasn't going to run as fast in Chicago as Indy because of the weather forecast at Chicago. And we haven't really talked about this yet, but it's a cool place to sort of round this off. In
Mhm.
Chicago, I actually think I was probably standing on a line in slightly better shape, or my body was in a better place than an Indy, even though I ran faster at Indy. I think the weather in Chicago slowed me down a lot more than probably most would realize with the
Yeah.
heat and humidity because I'm such a bad heat runner. I think on a perfect day, let's put it this way: if in Chicago we had Indy weather, I think I would have run 2:16 or 2:17. Now we didn't, so I ran 2:19 and I ran faster in Indy. But
Yeah.
what I'm trying to say is, as soon as I crossed the line in Chicago, my brain immediately went to protein and carbohydrates now. And so I literally went back to my bag and started smashing. I already had a bottle prepared with 50 grams of protein in a drink. I sipped on that for the next 30 minutes. I had a Coca-Cola. I had food. I got a massage the next day. I made it a point, and I was very strict about trying to sleep 8 hours a night for those 2, 3 nights after Chicago, because I know that window of about 2 to 3 days post marathon. If you don't take protein, don't take carbs, don't do anything, you start having alcohol, you will feel pretty bad on Tuesday, Wednesday. Whereas if you do everything the other way and recover on Wednesday, Thursday after Chicago, I felt pretty good. And I even did a workout on the Saturday of 8 by a K, and I felt not fully recovered, but pretty good.
Mm,
So
mm,
all those small things definitely play a pretty big role. And the other thing that's tricky is people often don't. People often ask the question of, I'm sure you get this question as a coach a lot. They're like, "What do you do to recover in the time after the marathon?" That can't be answered very well until you know how the person executed that marathon. Because
mm,
if the weather was good and they negative split and they fueled well, they might finish that marathon feeling pretty good, and they might only need 5 to 7 days to recover. But if it's really warm, they don't fuel very well, and that might not even really be their fault. That might be bad luck due to maybe missing a cup or having GI distress or these things. And then they don't, and then they blow up and they dribble in. It might take weeks to recover from that. So it's actually very hard to plan the recovery until you're there. And I actually took it almost day by day, not fully knowing, and just waking up, going for a walk, trying to understand, how do I feel? How does my legs feel? How does my body feel? And then I would make the decision basically then what I would do that day. That was in the 10 days after Chicago. Yeah.
mm.
So
When did
I
you?
sort of darted around there, but that was the main
No,
thing
it's
there. Yeah.
good. I agree with you. I mean, it depends on how you race it, and depends on your nutrition, and depends on both during race nutrition, also post race nutrition. Like there's a bunch of factors that go into your ability to recover and bounce back and be able to do another marathon. So that's really interesting. I guess I wouldn't have guessed that you were going into Chicago with the mindset of maybe not 100%, so that you could go to in Indianapolis at 100%. That's pretty interesting.
Well, in
Yeah.
Chicago, I only aimed for 2:19:30.
Mhm, mhm.
So if you notice the pace, I was always on pace for that. Well, the
Yeah.
first 5K I was slightly off, but I never tried to go faster than 2:19:30 in Chicago.
Mhm, mhm,
And I ran because I ran the last few miles thinking, just be conservative here because I don't want to cramp up and go 2:20 10. That would be so annoying. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, I did run it at, I wouldn't say 90%, probably 95%.
Yeah.
But I did finish Chicago with a little bit left, knowing that Indy was the one where I'd really shoot for the big one. And
Mhm.
I tried, came up a little short in the goal, but still ran a PB. So.
Just curious, when did your body kind of come around? You started feeling good again before Indianapolis.
hmm So Chicago was on the 13th on the Sunday. I did a
Yeah.
workout on the following Saturday, 8 by a K,
Hmm.
and in that workout, I still felt a little tight and stiff in the sort of the glutes and hips and quads. I think on the Monday, no, sorry, on the Tuesday, sorry. So it was 9 days afterwards. That
Yeah.
workout, then I felt hill sprints. I felt 100% recovered at that point.
Mm. Cool.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's not that long. I mean, that's interesting. And I wonder like how much longer that recovery would have taken if you had gone 100% Chicago. Like maybe
yeah.
it would have taken you 2 weeks or who knows. But
Well, I'll tell you what's weird.
uh,
I went 100% in Indy, and I'm now three
uh-huh.
days on. And to be honest, I actually feel pretty well recovered at this point, which is really
Mm,
strange. I don't know why. I didn't do the protein this time, so
okay.
yeah, a bit of a weird one. A bit
That's
weird.
weird.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, to be honest, I did have a lot of carbs straight after the race,
Yeah.
and I did have
Uh-huh.
a protein, but it wasn't immediately after the race. It was about an
Okay.
hour afterwards, which is still
Yeah.
pretty helpful. Yeah, I went for a walk before recording with you, and I was like, damn, I actually feel pretty good, which is a bit weird. So I don't know how this
Yeah.
recovery works. It's a bit of a mystery.
Eh,
Yeah,
Also, your body was very callous to the high mileage, and because you were running those 100+ mile weeks for 6 weeks, right? So,
exactly.
yeah, the fact that you had those 6 weeks at 100+ miles, I mean, that's going to play a big part in your how your body feels after the marathon, because like you're just so your
Absolutely.
body is so callous to that level of that amount of running. So that's certainly something to consider too. So it's all
Yeah,
those things you mentioned that kind of play into how you're going to be able to recover from a marathon. So awesome.
exactly.
That's it. Sorry, that was a lot.
No, man, it's all good.
Hope you didn't have something going on now. Um, but yeah, thanks for coming on, Matt. I really appreciate it. It's always a good chat with you. I guess before we go, first of all, do you have any advice for runners struggling to break through a barrier of theirs, like for you that was probably under 220?
Yeah, great way to finish off. The suggestion is something that you're not going to want to hear, but it's something that helped me a lot. Have a break. Take 2 to 4 weeks off. Don't worry about losing fitness in the short term. Don't worry about that. You'll get it back quickly. Take a break, take a step back, don't think about it for a little while, and then think about it and reapproach it with maybe a slightly different strategy. I can't tell you what that strategy is because what worked for me may work for you, it might not. But I think taking a little bit of it. So in January, I took the full month. I didn't have it completely off. I jogged a little bit here and there with friends, but it was mostly just social runs. But I didn't think about it. I sort of just stopped thinking about it for a while, and I think that's a really important thing. So that would be my suggestion. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good advice. All right, where can people reach you, Matt?
Probably most active on Strava, I would say. Then after that, probably I go on and off Instagram. Sometimes I post a lot and I'll delete it for a week because I realize I'm too addicted to it. So yeah, those two things, and YouTube. Sort of a little bit. I do blocks of posting, but yeah, I'd say Instagram and Strava are the two ones. So Matt Inglis Fox on Instagram, and just Matt Fox, I think it is on Strava. So yeah,
Yeah. Cool. I'll
thanks
put
a lot,
your
man.
information in the chat. Yeah, thanks so much for coming on, Matt. Really appreciate it. Best of luck going
Of
forward.
course,
Hope to see you get down to 410 in the mile. Fingers crossed.
let's give it a go. Thanks a lot, man. I love what you're doing, and I really appreciate the invite. Happy to chat anytime.
Yeah, no problem. Have a good one, Matt.